Chairman, we're now live.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our virtual meeting of the Corporate Services, Commerce and Communities Policy Overview Committee here at the London Borough of Hillingdon. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to monitor Council services and their performance within its remit and undertake in-depth reviews and witness sessions on topics, submitting any findings to the decision-making cabinet. My name is Councillor Richard Mills and I'm chairman of this meeting this evening. Before we start, some important online housekeeping for everyone present. Please ensure that any mobiles around you are turned off or on silent. Please ensure your microphone is muted when you're not speaking and unmute yourself to speak. As chairman, I will call on those to speak during the meeting. So if you would like to speak, please do indicate and I will call you as I see you. If there are a number of you that indicate at the same time, I will notify that I've seen an order of you and let you know which order you'll be called to speak. As in previous times, if you can try and limit your question to have an initial question and then a potential follow-up, depending on the answer, that would be grateful to ensure everybody gets the opportunity to speak. In terms of the technical side of the meeting, should anyone leave the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time, be that to a lost connection, the meeting will continue unless we are not quorate, which is 5 councillors. Before we move on to the agenda, we would like to do a roll call of everyone present to confirm your attendance. So if you could please indicate you are present when I say your name. Vice Chairman, Councillor Harangi.
Present.
Councillor Bridges. Councillor Brightman.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor DeVille.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Goddard.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Dillon.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Bliss.
Present.
And Councillor Farley.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you all. And then from officers from the Council, from Democratic Services, Luke Taylor.
Present, Chairman.
And from Finance, Ian Waters.
Present, Chairman.
Thanks very much, everybody. So we'll now move on to the agenda. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence.
We've had no apologies.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest before us this evening. I will take it that there are no interests if nothing is declared now. Thank you. Now need to receive and agree the minutes of previous meetings, which is the minutes from the meeting held on the 4th of February and the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of May. Take those minutes agreed unless there are any other comments. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on page 2, with regards to the YouTube statistics, I was wondering when, because I don't recall seeing any statistics of the COVID and whatnot. It's likely that that hasn't happened, but I was wondering whether or not we can or have made progress or towards when we can actually know when we're going to get those.
Apologies, Councillor. Yeah, we can try and get them to you as soon as possible if that's all right. I can chase that up next week. That's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 is to confirm that all items before us tonight are part 1 and will be held in public. Takes on to agenda item 5, 2021 budget planning, which I'll hand over to Ian to speak on, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is our first regular appearance from Finance for the year at the committee. Obviously, with COVID, everything running a little later, we'd normally be with you in July, but we're here in September. The report we've presented today provides the context in which we'll be setting the council's budgets for the forthcoming financial year. Once the Cabinet have prepared a set of budget proposals and those have been presented at Cabinet in December, myself or one of my colleagues will be back in January to run the committee through specific proposals relating to, the specific budget proposals for the new year, I should say. So today is I suppose today in a sense is slightly, a focus on context rather than specific proposals that would be ready for implementation next year. In terms of the council's general fund, so back in February when we set the budgets for the current year, we anticipated a £20 million saving requirement over the next 2 years. This is mainly being driven by inflationary pressures. There will be pay awards, contracts will cost more, increasing demand for services linked to a growing population, and similarly increased spending on capital financing, in part linked to spending more on providing services to that growing population. In the budget strategy at the moment, that is being offset by a level of tax-based growth from the growing population in the borough, a small amount of inflation on government grants, which is a change from where we've been in recent years, where they've been on a downward trajectory, and then the planned increases in council tax over the next 2 years. That position is not, from the work we've done so far, we don't expect that to move materially as we go into the budget setting cycle for this year, which leads me on nicely to say that's despite the COVID-19 pressures that we're seeing at the minute. So in terms of what we're dealing with in year, the council's facing a pressure of around £26 million in terms of the impact on COVID on things like some of our income streams and the direct cost to the council of some of the measures we're taking to respond and support the local community. As of today, all but £3 million of that planned expenditure has been covered by grant funding from government that we've already got in the bank. So the remaining balance, we have £9 million set aside in earmarked reserves to manage anything that government grants are not available to fund, but we're reasonably confident that more funding should be forthcoming, particularly if there's any sort of increase in, say, a second lockdown or something like that. We'd expect sort of a level of government support. Outside of the COVID-19 related pressures, the rest of the budget is, I phrase it, it's a slightly sort of bland monitoring position at the minute. We're around £360,000 underspent at this point in the year, but you know, with the exception of COVID, everything is pretty much on track. So we're expecting that should there be COVID pressures running into the new financial year, that same funding regime from government would continue. So therefore, that's why we're confident that we're still looking at this circa £20 million gap over the next 2 years. Outside of the council's general fund, I'll just briefly mention that the housing revenue account continues to be backed by a sort of a balanced, fully funded 30-year business plan. So we're not expecting any sort of radical budget proposals around the housing revenue account this year. And the often reported pressure on high needs SEND within the schools budget is still a pressure. There's still growing demand there, but we're clear that we've got the underwriting from DFE that isn't a pressure that's going to fall on the council's general fund. So although it still remains something we need to work on, it's not going to directly hit budget setting for the council's own operations. As in previous years, the work is underway on developing budget proposals for presentation to the administration. This is following the same sort of 5 themes that we've worked on in recent years. So expect a number of proposals around service transformation, so delivering the same functions for less, or delivering better functions for less if possible. Zero-based reviews, whereby we make sure that we have budgets set which reflect the actual service that's being delivered rather than a sort of historic level of spending that's not required anymore. Number of measures around procurement, savings that relate to managing demand, so things like where we can telecare line equipment in social care and those kind of measures, and then finally making sure that our fees and charges are set at an appropriate level. So work is underway against those themes at the minute. In terms of the timetable for budget setting, as I said, the final budget proposals that the Cabinet want to put forward for public consultation will be approved at the December meeting of Cabinet. That will then go out to the public consultation, and myself or one of my colleagues will be back with the committee in January to run through those in more detail before we get to final council tax setting in February. I'm conscious that was a fairly lengthy run through of what was in the report, but hopefully sort of I've picked up on the key areas. If there are any questions, I'm here to assist.
Thank you very much, Ian. I've seen a couple of people indicating. So first of all, be Councillor Goddard, followed by Councillor Dillon, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, actually, my question is two parts to it, but they are related, I think. And I would guess that the first part is fairly easy, and the second part potentially less so, if you'll permit me. And forgive me, this first part, Ian, is probably the consequence of being having been involved in accounting in the private sector as opposed to the public sector. But I'm slightly bemused by the presentation which shows the use of cash balances against reported expenditure. I mean, does this effectively mean that you know, the overspend has just delved into the cash balance, and there it is? I mean, in the private sector, you wouldn't report it like that, and I guess it's just a lack of my understanding of the of public sector accounting. Perhaps you could comment on that, and I'll go on to the second one.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I lost my mouse there for a moment. Yeah, so I think I think what I want to stress is it's a planned use of the reserves. So over effectively the early 2010s, the council had a strategy of effectively building up balances as much as we could in the face of declining government funding. Effectively, the current drawing on balances is using that money that we set aside for this purpose in the early 2010s. The amount that we're drawing down from balances is stepping down over the sort of the next 3 years. So effectively, this is a sort of a smooth glide path, whereby at times we've seen government grants drop quite sharply. So rather than trying to reform services in a single year, the balances just give us that opportunity that we can deliver change over, say, 3 years instead of 1. So it's not that we're sort of in deficit or making a loss or an unplanned deficit. This was sort of part of the budget strategy over multiple years, and hopefully that helps clarify, Councillor.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, it does. And the tricky part of the question is, if I look at the table on page 12, Ian, I mean, that does show that I would suggest an outstanding performance in prior years in terms of the savings that have been achieved. But there does appear to have been a diminishing return in savings in the later years. Can we therefore take it that I appreciate that there isn't too much specificity at the moment in terms of the 20 million that's looked to be saved in the next 2 years, but can I take it that given this recent historic pattern, you know, that's fairly challenging, isn't it?
Yes, so I think so. If certainly the level of savings we delivered in say 1819 and 1920 would be coming out at a much lower level. I think it's I think in a sense the savings programme will adapt to the level of savings that are required in the year, if that's a way to put it. So in 2018-19 and 2019-20, we would be working to a slightly lower savings requirements at the time. So I think part of the nature of any exercise like this is what once you've got a plan to balance the budget, I suppose as further savings could be implemented the following year. So we do. There's still plenty of opportunities across the council to bridge a budget gap of the size that we're presenting at the minute. So yeah, it's certainly not easy. As I think table 3 shows, sort of that potentially there are sort of diminishing returns in some areas, particularly perhaps around maybe zero-based reviews. Because if you look back to 15-16 and 16-17, I suppose we took a lot of fat out of the budgets, if that's a way to put it. Almost there was a little slack in some areas which we were able to to remove, which potentially inflated the savings figures over and above what you might call the real savings, like transformation work, when sort of practical efforts required to extract those savings. Hopefully that goes some way to answering the query.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Ian. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. I try not to put you in a tricky position. We set our council tax at 90% of other local authorities. Given that we have this shortfall, would you guys in your department be looking to suggest to the administration that we possibly scrap that or move that marker up to maybe 95, 97% to help with the shortfall?
I don't think it's necessarily our place to sort of give the administration a steer around sort of policies in that kind of area. I suppose the only comment that I would make is in the context of sort of £20 million worth of savings over the next couple of years. That difference between 90% and say 100%, that's not going to bridge the 20 million in and of itself. I have to admit, I'm desperately flicking through my report on the other screen just to check, but I will. I can't see the figure in front of me, so I'll send on to Luke just confirmation of what that 10% difference would be in council tax increases, just to provide the context.
Lovely. You answered my second question, so I'll get a third now. It says on page number 13 that the bid reviews have been conducted. With bid reviews being conducted and service transformations, do we have an idea of the savings that we are possibly looking at in those and what the service transformations have been?
This is where I'll have to claim ignorance. So I'm a week back from shared parental leave. We have run through the usual sort of service transformation sessions. I personally haven't been involved in them this year. We wouldn't normally at this stage start to translate those until we get the opportunity to brief the administration. But it will be sort of forthcoming in the later budget reports in the year.
Okay. Councillor Farley, you indicated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to know in terms of on page 10, 14, in relation to the social housing provision, there is a net increase of around, I think, 255. I know over 4 years, well, that's about 50 to 60 a year. I'm wondering what if there's a plan for the acquisition of the new dwellings. I also know sales, will happen if and when they happen over those 4 years. But also, so, I mean, it's a small number of properties, and as councillors, we are aware that, particularly with ward surgeries and with contacts from residents, housing is a particular issue for many of us, for many residents. So I was wondering if there's a sort of a planned phasing at this stage for the acquisition. Thank you.
The figure, the 495 new dwellings, there's a profile of when that was expected to be delivered back in February 2020's budget papers. What I can do is I can ask colleagues just to confirm what the most recent phasing of that looks like, and share that via DEM services.
Thank you.
Did you want to come back with anything further on that, Councillor Farley?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, just a final look around. Anyone else indicating on this item? No, in which case, thank you very much, Ian. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And having just come back from parental leave, I'm sure you've got other things you can be well used for this evening as well. So we're fine for you to drop off the meeting now.
And thank you, Councillor. And yes, thank you for the opportunity to avoid the difficult bits of bedtime this evening. So.
Okay, so that takes us on to agenda item 6, which is our review from last municipal year on local commerce, employment, skills and creation. Hopefully members have had a chance to look at the report in the pack. So essentially now there are 3 recommendations that we're looking to bring forward this evening. One is to note and agree the review in its completeness, which includes the 6 recommendations that we have agreed at our previous meeting, which now has a full report around it. I think everyone has also had sight of. Obviously now when you read it compared to when it was written 6-7 months ago, the world is a slightly different place. Therefore, I think as the second recommendation, we clearly have to note that COVID has a significant impact on this, and essentially it's made the report somewhat out of date and not complete. And what I think is important on this is that this shows around this second recommendation is around that there's actual value and work in our reviews and reports, and that these are not just committee exercises that we go through. There are tangible outputs for these, and that it wouldn't be right for us to send it to Cabinet in its current form, which is why I'm hoping the committee this evening will agree the third recommendation, which is essentially a letter to Cabinet, as well as sending them the whole review in its completeness, but effectively saying that given what's happened, the recommendations are now not current, but we think it's important for them to note to see the work we've done, and given that there is likely to be further work done across the council and the economy, hopefully this review and the recommendations included within it can be used and built towards any future work that the council has done as a whole. So I'm happy to take comments on this. Councillor Goddard, I see you indicated.
Chairman, thank you for that, and I agree completely with the assertion that the world has changed, and therefore whilst I think it's important that we demonstrate to Cabinet that the depth and the breadth of the work that's been done, I do wonder if the impact in this borough of, in particular, the loss of jobs at Heathrow, which I think is a continuing subject, really makes a case for almost opening up this subject again. I mean, I must claim complete ignorance of our ability to do that, but it seems to me that the loss of jobs at Heathrow really is something that cries out for an additional surge of creativity to try and mitigate the impact. And therefore, I do wonder whether there is scope for holding this subject open within this committee.
So on that was one of the options that I'd considered and did discuss with officers and Cabinet around the future way forward to resolve this. However, I think given that there's still so much uncertainty, to put it on hold would effectively be putting it on hold for too long, and we would then, until there's still too much uncertainty, we don't know how things are going to pan out. However, I think it is something that we can come back to, but it's probably going to need a few years' time for everything to take its impact and toll for us to be able to have a realistic view, certainly to be able to bring forward any tangible recommendations, which is why at this stage the proposal is to present it in its current form, show the work that we've done, but clearly offer ourselves to be available for future work that is carried out. And I think the points that you made around jobs in the economy is going to be a big one, but I think we still need to wait to see what the full impact of this is going to be, because again, you see the news today of areas in the north being impacted. If that continues across the country, then things are clearly going to change in a worse direction to what maybe even 2-3 weeks ago people thought the direction of travel was beginning to go. So I think at the minute there is too much uncertainty for us to be able to commit to looking at something in any more detail right now. Councillor Dillon.
Hi, just from my perspective, no, I'd be happy with your suggestion. Whilst I note Councillor Goddard's comments, and I think they are quite timely, it's possibly something that we can look at as a review topic, minor or major, the implications of COVID on or within our remit. So I think what you said so far is great, and maybe it could be something that we can look at in agenda item 7.
Yeah, thank you. And just on that, I think the implications of COVID, as in the implications on the council of COVID, are going to be wide varying and wide impacting. My expectation is that it will probably be even outside the scope of the committee. I think it will impact so many areas. It's effectively going to be a council-wide thing. So we'll have to see how it's going to be coordinated. I understand that there is already a task force being assembled around from different departments with senior officers in that, but that's something I'm going to keep close to understand how we can leverage off of that. Like I said, I would like us to do something on it, but we just need to see how that pans out in the future. But yeah, in terms of future work program, something we want to have on it, but at the minute, I don't think we can commit to it. So on that basis, does anyone have anything they wish to say more or object? Otherwise, do we take those 3 recommendations in the report as agreed? Okay, I see no hand, so you take that.
Councillor Mills.
Dillon?
Sorry, I don't know if it's me or my connection, but I'm not grabbing everything that Councillor Mills is saying, so the chairman is saying. Is that anyone else having effects?
I've certainly a couple of times, yeah, it has for me as well, Councillor Mills. Your connection breaks very quickly, and then you come back in muffled, and it comes very quickly, and it's hard to follow. I'm not sure whether this might be might be served if you left the meeting and rejoined very quickly. It might help. I don't know if you're happy to do that. Yeah. So just bear with us, councillors, if you could just remain on mute, and we can let Councillor Mills rejoin.
Is that any better? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there then. So yes, what I was saying was effectively, I think if people are happy with that, we can agree those 3 recommendations unless anyone has any objections or wants to say anything further on it. Thank you. Then we take that as agreed. So that brings us to agenda item 7, selecting a future review topic. I know people have mentioned COVID. One of the areas that I've had discussions on so far around the future review is around the impact of COVID sector, both in terms of how they were able to act during the COVID pandemic, and also what support we as a council can continue to give them on an ongoing basis.
Sorry, Chairman, I think
to help them.
So your connection just quickly dropped out in the middle of that. I don't know if everyone caught all of that. If that's okay, it might be worth repeating. Sorry, it's still doing the same thing, I'm afraid.
Let me drop out and come back in. Bear with me 1 minute.
Hi, Chairman. We're back online now.
Okay, thanks very much. Apologies, everybody. So agenda item 7, looking at selecting a future review topic. I know we just mentioned around COVID and the impacts of that. What I'm looking to suggest to the committee this evening is a review into the impact of COVID on the voluntary sector. So how obviously they were able to react when COVID situation occurred, and effectively how we as a council can support them, how we can help organisations to become more self-sufficient and able to act when required and called upon. Members will know that the group Hillingdon for All, or H for All, had a number of challenges when the pandemic occurred, and the council had to assist them with a number of operations, some of which councillors were involved in themselves. In addition, obviously, understand what support does the council provide and receive from these groups, particularly those that we provide funding to ensure that they were fit for purpose. So that was what I thought was a potential review given the recent situation, and wondered if people had any comments on that, or alternative topics people wish to suggest. Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually think that's a very good subject to review, particularly as it's sort of currently going through the next round of funding for the various charities.
Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested in looking at something on COVID, but we have a number of other ones that we could possibly discuss, and may form something of a minor review, if you don't mind me mentioning those now. Yeah,
that's okay. Happy to look at options for that.
Seeing as communities now comes under our overview committee, possibly a review of the ASB function officers. We're receiving a number of antisocial behaviour, maybe partly related to COVID, etc., and especially with the involving the police with street racing and youth activity. So maybe that's one item we could possibly look at. The other one would be the review of Hillingdon First Limited. They are now a couple of years into their operation, and so we could look at how they are performing. And then the third one that could be also of interest is, again, it kind of has COVID connotations of sorts, and Grenfell. It's a review of our maintenance and upkeep of our council-owned buildings, really. The cladding issues, whether our systems within those buildings, especially the Civic Centre, the air conditioning system, if that's COVID safe, etc., heating systems, cleaning, anything around that area. 3 suggestions that could be COVID related in some ways, but certainly will affect our residents.
Okay, sorry, you had the ASB, the third one was around the buildings. What was the second one?
Hillingdon First Limited.
Oh yeah, which is the property company, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I think just my initial comments on a couple of those before coming to you, Councillor Goddard. The ASB, I think, is a valid one. What I think is, you will recall we did the community safety review. I believe, Luke, keep me right on this, that's scheduled to come back to us in this cycle around what has been implemented from our review. How has that happened? So potentially we could include that as part of that, if you're open to that as an idea. I think we could tie that in.
Sorry, that is correct. We've currently got it scheduled in for the November meeting. The local policing and community safety in Hillingdon review is going to come back, and we're going to get an update on that. So it's certainly something that I can speak to the lead officers on and see whether it's possible to tie them in at the same meeting, if you're happy. So if the officers come to present on one, we can have an information item or an update on the other as well, if you're content with that.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think what would be good then is in our next meeting in October that we almost formalise that, so the officers are prepared. So if we can submit them something in advance rather than surprising them on the night effectively with additional questions rather than what they're expecting to present to us. So if they're due to come in November and cover that previous review, we can add on to that the suggestion that Councillor Dillon has given. Hillingdon first, yes, I think we can certainly get some information report on that to see what's happened to date with that in terms of the developments they've been involved in. In terms of the buildings, again, I just would like to clarify through Luke around what is within the terms of reference and scope of this committee, which is probably around the council building, but may not include housing, because I think that would be under a different committee. But that's something I think if we take away, we can look to see how broad we can be on that, to look at what impact there are on council facilities.
Yes, Chairman, I'm happy to do that. Sorry, just looking through the terms of reference now, I don't think we'd be able to do housing in its wider element. I think that would fall under another POC, but we could certainly look at our own sort of council businesses or properties rented out. I think that falls under our scope. So I can look into that one and get back to you if you like ahead of the next meeting, and we can just confirm whether that's something that's a possibility, and we can add it to the work programme at the next meeting if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, Councillor Dean, do you want to come back on those?
Yeah, no, just to say thank you for taking those on board.
Okay, Councillor Goddard, you indicated, and then Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, to a large extent, Chairman, you've preempted what I was going to say, because I was certainly going to endorse and support Councillor Dillon's suggestion that we look at ASB. I think it is an area certainly that is creating some issues at the moment, and I think it certainly would merit attention by this committee.
Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sort of going back to the earlier point that Councillor Dillon made regarding the building issues and review. Would the quality of the building regulations surrounding HMOs be appropriate to cover under that brief, or would that fall to another POC?
Chairman, if I could just quickly cut in on that. I'm right now offhand, I'm not 100%. That's something that I can check with our officers, though. I can see. I suspect HMOs may not fall under this one, but I'm not 100% on that one. So if I could send you an update in an email, I can send an update to all councillors to let them know which of these items would definitely fall under our remit and which wouldn't, if that's okay.
Thank you, Luke.
Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, just coming back on the HMO. HMOs are, the number of HMOs are set in planning policy. So I don't know if planning falls under our remit or not as a review item, because it's government legislation, isn't it? I don't know if Councillor Brighton's referring to the number or the area within which HMOs are, like we have in Uxbridge South, is it, where we had the article, was it 16?
Article 4.
Article 4 limiting the
Yeah.
number of HMOs. So maybe if we get the context right, then that's something that we could look at. I don't know which angle Councillor Brighton's trying to look at it at from.
You can come back, Councillor Brightman, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Dillon, the specific thing that I'm concerned about, and I don't know if it's the same borough-wide as it is in Charville, but the quality, basically, a lot of these HMOs, somebody stuck a Yale lock on a kid's bedroom door and called it a separate accommodation, and it really isn't. You've still got noise pollution, smoke pollution, because people are allowed to smoke in their own homes. There's the placing of different types of residents, so you could have a single mum in one room and a recovering addict in another, and it's just all a little bit too close and not what I call individual dwellings. It's entirely different if you're looking at sort of Brunel and students, but not the manner in which residents are being placed currently, in my opinion.
I think Luke, if you can look into this one,
I can, Chairman. I'm just having a quick look over the remit of the Residents' Education Environmental Services POC. They seem to have planning and building control under there, so it might fall under their POC.
Right,
but I will take this away and I'll have a better look into it, and I'll send an email to the entire committee just confirming what's the case.
Yeah, okay. I think just from looking through our terms of reference, there's topics that you could argue might form an element of it, but I think if ResPOC have planning and building control, that seems to be the right location for that. Councillor Brightman, did you want to add something more?
Only insofar as presumably Hillingdon Homes or the building company doesn't get involved in building HMOs then.
Do not believe so, but if we are looking to do that as an information paper, then when they come on that can be something we can clarify when that report comes to us as well. Councillor Bridges, did you have a suggestion for review or a report to come to the committee?
Yes, in terms of community safety unit for this POC, I believe it might be worth looking at the alleyway gating scheme. Whilst it is a very good scheme for residents to start with, there tends to be problems further down the line when people have moved or died and the ownership of those alleyways become quite problematic. And I just wonder if there's anything more we can be doing as a council in terms of at least maintaining an up-to-date list of residents who have ownership of these keys, so that when residents are moving in and out, they have someone as a key point of contact, because there seems to be a lot of confusion. For me personally, as I experience as a councillor in my ward, with a lot of alleyway gating schemes, it's just something worth looking at, I think. If not as a review, then possibly as an information report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You yourself weren't overly clear there, but I believe what you were saying was around the alley gating scheme, that when it starts, it seems to be well received, but when there's changes in an area, the ongoing maintenance of it may be a problem. So that could be something that we could get an information report on. Councillor Dillon.
As someone whose ward is affected increasingly by people not looking after their the alleyways, I would wholeheartedly support that. It's a very good item to review and needs it.
Okay, thank you. Again, can this be incorporated in antisocial behaviour community safety, effectively adding that onto that potential one in November, because I'm presuming the officer team is going to be the same people for this. So if we can get an information report around that on the same date, that would look to make the best use of everyone's time as well, if people are happy with it to be done on that basis.
Chairman, yeah, I can raise that with the officers, and I can just I'll just double check that that's the same team, and if it is, then we can ask to add that on as well, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have anything they'd like to suggest that we could potentially look at? Okay, good. I see no other hands, so we will take those away. And hopefully ahead of the October meeting, we can get officers to produce a full scoping report on the review, and then information reports that could be scheduled into our work programme.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. I will contact the officers involved with the voluntary sector and see if they can come up with a scoping report that can be provided for the October meeting. And then we can also go through all the other items. I can provide a written update via email to the committee on what is within our remit and what's not, and then we can take them from there. And maybe at the October meeting we can, or before that, I'll schedule some onto the work programme, and then we can juggle them around if we need to, if that's okay with you, Chairman.
Yeah, that's fine for me, thank you. Okay, so that takes us to agenda item 8, which is the forward plan. Does anyone have any comments that they'd like to make on this? Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to get some more information, please, on item number 9, which is on page 2 of the actual grid, the statement for licensing policy for consultation policy framework. It says that the council is required to review its licensing policy with regards to the future final version for consideration in December of this year. I'd like to know what the review entails and how we feed into that, or how we can possibly amend or add to the council's licensing policy. My assumption being is that it's you know, the actual licensing process is obviously following the policy. It's how that policy is amended. Thank you.
Thank you. So on that, I believe that's going to Cabinet next Thursday. I think the agenda came out and the papers came out from that today. So I'll be honest, I haven't looked at that yet, so I don't know if it contains any further detail. But Luke, I don't know if you can just look at that to understand how do members have an input into that? Is that an ongoing opportunity? If we wanted to, should we have already done that through licensing colleagues, or is there another process in which members are sought their opinion? I will go to Councillor Goddard, who chairs licensing, see if he has anything to add.
Well, the only thing to add, Chairman, is that there is a full meeting of the licensing committee, and they're fairly rare things because the majority of the activity is subcommittee and hearings, but the full committee, I believe, is meeting on, I think it's the 14th of October, and I'm sure that this review is on the agenda there. And of course, you know, there's a full complement of councillors on that committee. So I think I would have thought, to Councillor Farley's observation, there is scope to contribute.
Thank you. So I guess on that, the advice would be speak to your colleagues who are on that committee to make sure any comments you have are carried forward by them.
I can, Chairman, if I can cut in and I can just sort of, maybe that's something I can raise as well in the next day or so, and I can come back to you guys with a response over the weekend, or just before the weekend if that's possible, just in case there's anything further I can add to what Councillor Goddard just said.
Thank you. Any other comments on the forward plan? No, we take that as noted as it is then. So agenda item 9 is the work programme. So in our meeting in October, which most likely now look like it will be virtual again, hopefully we'll have the scoping report for the review. The annual complaints and service update report comes around to us again. And we're also intending to get a update on our previous review around recruitment that we as a committee made a number of recommendations for. It's now been maybe 18 months since they were recommended. So I know we delayed this coming back to us because not enough time had passed for things to be implemented around the recruitment phase and the changes that were being made into that. But hopefully in October that can still go ahead in terms of getting an update on that to see what changes have been made. And again, expect there to be something COVID related in an update that happens now as opposed to would have done a few months ago.
Chairman, just on that, I know the head of HR at the time was Mike Talbot, and he led on that one. I know he's been involved in a lot of other COVID-related responses over the last few months, so I will double check with him that the time frame works for him, if that's okay, because I understand obviously he's things may have changed. He might be very busy at the moment, so if you're comfortable with me just double checking that he can, or another officer could present that, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine. If we can check that, because obviously if he or they are unable to attend, then we may need to look at changing the order for their other items. But I think if we can do that, I would like to, because I'd like the policing and community safety one to come in November so that we can carry forward those ASB items that have been raised tonight and get traction on those in October so that there's preparation can be done ahead of the November meeting.
Sure, that's no problem. I'll add the other items, the work programme as well, that were discussed in I think it was agenda item 7.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Does anyone have any other comments they wish to make? No, lovely. Thank you very much. That will close the meeting. Councillor, if I just ask you to remain on mute until the meeting is fully closed online as well. Thank you very much, everybody, and apologies for the technological difficulties.
Thanks, Chairman. If everyone could just remain online for a couple of moments while I just stop the